Hello and welcome to The World This Week with me, Gavin Lee, live every Friday here on France 24, discussing the biggest events of the past 7 days with a panel of 4 distinguished international journalists. Our programme now selected among the world's best podcasts for current affairs too. First, thank you for watching. In another record-breaking and bleak week for Ukraine, with Russia using an unprecedented amount of missiles and drones on Ukrainian cities, with the increasing use of decoy drones to confuse and exhaust Ukraine's air defences. President Trump, too, appeared confused and exhausted by Putin. The carrot approach to a ceasefire turning to the stick method. Sanctions have now been threatened by Washington, and Trump has overturned last week's sudden pause on military aid to Kyiv.
That was a war that should have never happened, and a lot of people are dying, and it should end. And I don't know, we get a lot of thrown at us by Putin for you want to know the truth. He's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
It's been a week of pomp and pageantry for the Macrons on a 3-day state visit to the UK. It was a symbolic start at Windsor Castle with a welcome cocktail named the Entente, a nod to past efforts of rapprochement. The menu described it as a British gin with a touch of lemon curd and French pastis, garnished with dried French cornflowers and English roses. After the frayed post-Brexit relations, it was time to say salut and chin-chin with the King and Keir toasting better relations and a fresh start, plus an agreement nuclear cooperation if threatened in light of Russia's relentless attacks on Ukraine, and a new plan to stop migrants crossing the channel on small boats. Well, on life after Brexit, President Macron couldn't resist a little "I told you so."
I'm very respectful for the voice of people and the choice your country made a few years ago, 9 years ago. And I'm lucid about the solemnity of the state visit being the first one of a European head of state post-Brexit. But I have to say, the European Union was stronger with you, and you were stronger with the European Union.
And it's been a week where Elon Musk's AI chatbot started imitating Hitler, days after proclaiming that Grok had improved significantly and that users should notice a difference when asking it questions. They certainly did. Grok told users on X he was MechaHitler, praising the Nazi leader and what it called his ability to deal with anti-white hate as well as defending anti-Semitic tropes. Musk said the inappropriate posts have now been removed and that Grok was too easy to please, too easily manipulated. A day after Grokgate, the CEO of X Linda Yaccarino resigned. She'd been brought in to calm the X waters last year after advertisers threatened to pull sponsorship, and Musk explicitly and of course very publicly told them where to go, this time after her resignation announcement, and notably no frills. Thank you for your contributions. And it was no more than that. So stepping in to calm the world this week's waters, and thanks in advance for your contributions. On the panel alongside me, writer and broadcaster Agnès Poirier. Great to have you with us. Author of the highly acclaimed Left Bank, Art, Passion, and the Rebirth of Paris 1940 to 1950, and Notre Dame as well, the soul of France. And as a former UK correspondent.
Not a former,
current.
Yeah.
A long-standing UK correspondent. And for many French newspapers. That's why you didn't let me finish my line. For many French newspapers, and currently British ones as well. Can I get your thoughts, because you're an author as well, on Touché, a French woman's take on the English. What are you making of this week's visit from President Macron?
Rather productive, I think. Probably since the Lancaster House, which was not a state visit, of course, but it was in 2010. And remember the last few years, since Brexit, the bilateral relationship was, the Entente was actually glacial. Especially under Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. So it's wonderful to have them back. And it's not as if they have any choice. We need to be together, to be very close and to cooperate very closely, certainly more closely than we have in a very long time. Because, we used to look in different, even opposite directions, really, Britain towards the US and the Gaullist France towards the rest of the world. But now we need to look in the same direction.
And we're going to get into what came out of it, still a friction, and there are a number. But they are strange bedfellows, Starmer and Macron, and yet they seem to make it work?
Well, they have a lot of things in common that, domestically they are not exactly in the best of shape. But on the international stage, both of them have a, sure footing. And it's true. I mean, their personality is very different. But I think Macron talked about a common path or something like this, which they have to tread together.
And it's great that you're with us tonight. Also with us, Catherine Norris-Trent. Evening, Catherine.
Hi, Gavin.
Catherine is Senior International Correspondent for France 24, winner of the Bio-Calvados Award for War Reporting, the UN's Correspondent Association Award for Outstanding International Reportage in 2018. And recently, her work on the gangs of Haiti, winning the Best Documentary and Audience Choice Award 2 at the World Media Festival. And you can watch the documentary on France 24 website, by the way, and I recommend you do. Catherine, can we talk about...
Thank you for that.
No, we should talk about Haiti, because in the triage of world wars, we kind of lose what's going on. You were interviewed at the time, Jimmy Cherizier, the kind of gang lord boss.
Spokesman, yeah.
So what has happened there? What's going on?
So when we went last May, the gangs had taken more than 80% of Port-au-Prince, Haiti's capital. It's got worse in the past year. It's more like 90% now. They are continuing to act with impunity, despite the multinational force being deployed there. That hasn't made much of a difference. Ordinary Haitian people in Port-au-Prince are continuing to suffer, their lives very much blighted by this ongoing gang violence. The authorities basically powerless, and huge amounts of corruption and violence going on. So I'm sorry, it's a bit of a depressing start to the programme, but it is really important we keep talking about it, because while the world looks elsewhere, and there are many things to look at, I do understand that, this is getting worse and worse. And it's kind of this unresolved problem, which is going to take a great deal of national and international will to solve. And at the moment, it doesn't feel like there is that will.
It strikes me that you had very good access to Jimmy Cherizier. I've since seen that he's declared journalists as enemies.
Yeah, the press are enemies now, according to him. I mean, you never know where you're going to be with these gang leaders. They're accused of all kinds of crimes. They have UN international sanctions against them. At one point, they decided that they wanted to speak out in order to try and carve out some political space, I think, for themselves. And so, yeah, they were able to speak to the international press, those who could get there, with taking certain risks, of course. But that kind of thing, those windows don't stay open very long, and you don't know what kind of game the gangs and the people behind them. That's important, because there are big, powerful economic interests and political interests behind them are playing. So I'm going to go and go back, but the access in those kind of places is very difficult.
And Catherine, it's great to have your experience and your insight tonight. Let's move to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by the Sunday Times senior US correspondent, Louise Callahan. Evening, Louise. And I should mention...
Hi, good evening.
Good evening to you. Previously, the Times' Middle East correspondent, reporting from Syria, Iraq, and here in Europe as well, reporting Ukraine extensively. Named Foreign Reporter of the Year at last year's PA Press Awards, winner of the Marie Colvin Award for British Journalism 2018 for her reporting in the then rebel-held Syria, and also author of Father of Lions, about the efforts to save animals under ISIS-controlled Mosul. Louise, tell me about your week. What have you been following? And I know one thing that I'd like you to touch upon is Steve Witkoff. You've recently done quite an impressive profile.
Thank you. Yeah, no, my fascination with Steve Witkoff remains undimmed. He is one of Trump's only few close friends. I think, there's been widespread reporting about the president's really close circle. He doesn't really have that many people close to him. But Steve Witkoff is his buddy for 40 years. They met when they were both young property developers in New York, when Trump was this kind of braggadocious young Queens guy, and since then they've stayed very close. Their families and particularly their kids are very close. Anyway, now Trump's in power for a second term, and his old golf buddy Steve Witkoff has been put in charge of solving 3 of the world's most intractable conflicts. So he's in charge of solving the war between Israel and Hamas. He's in charge of stopping the war in Russia and Ukraine, and also ending, creating some kind of agreement between the US and Iran to stop its nuclear, to stop it producing nuclear weapons. So I think that he's obviously got this huge amount on his plate, and what he's doing is running essentially a parallel track of diplomatic negotiations. So we have Marco Rubio in the State Department, who's running the way that diplomacy usually works, where it's, the third undersecretary of the undersecretary speaks to the third assistant of the other side, and there's this very slow bureaucratic movement of diplomatic negotiations. We've got Rubio doing that, and then on the other side, we've got Witkoff turning up in his private jet, which he claims that he flies around the world on his own dime, and sitting down with particularly the Qataris, who are very, very key mediators in this negotiations between Israel and Hamas to end the war, and sitting down with them, and he knows them because he has business dealings with Qatar, and sitting down with them and sort of trying to negotiate an end to the war.
And it all starts, the thread goes back to the 80s, a ham and Swiss cheese on rye bread in a late-night bar in New York, doesn't it? It's a big thank you.
Absolutely.
And payback, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the wisest investments that Steve Witkoff ever made. And legend goes, and who knows if this is true, that that him and Trump knew each other a bit, and then they were in a late-night diner in Manhattan in the 80s, and Trump wanted a sandwich, but he didn't have any change on him. Happily, Steve Witkoff did. And ever since then, they've been bosom buddies.
Wow, what an investment. I will be buying people sandwiches when they need them. You never know what could happen. Great to have you with us. Let's also go to Brussels. Let's bring in Joachim Clementi, Europe correspondent at Estonia's public broadcaster ERR, joining us this evening from Belgium. Great to have you back with us, Joachim, because last time we spoke, you just interviewed President Zelensky here in Paris. You're one of 4 correspondents chosen with that incredible backdrop behind you as well. What have you been working on since, and what's your focus been this week?
I mean, as always, I think for our viewers, the most important thing is just security, right? I mean, if we're talking in Paris with Zelensky about how Europe can help Ukraine, ever since then, what I'm trying to follow on is, are we doing all the things Europe has been promising in doing, delivering aid, spending more on security. I was at The Hague when we agreed to spend more to defend ourselves, and also in that percentage also to send more help to Ukraine. So really trying to just follow through if Europe is, putting its mouth or, doing what it says it's supposed to be doing, which is addressing the existential threat that Russia is posing.
Joachim, great that you're with us as well this evening. Let's begin. Let's get straight to events, as Joachim was talking about, in Ukraine this week. It's been 176 weeks since the full-scale Russian invasion, and 15 weeks since the US and Russian negotiators sat round a table in Riyadh, bringing Moscow from Western isolation, Washington appearing hopeful they could convince Putin to agree an unconditional ceasefire. Back then, as we just heard, Trump's emissary, Steve Witkoff, was back and forth to the Kremlin and spoke of what he believed was Putin's desire for a deal.
That we were here to begin a real discussion, a productive discussion about how to end this conflict. And President Putin, to his credit, sent all kinds of signals back to the president that this is the path that he wanted to be on, including statements that he made. In the second visit that I had, it got personal. The President Putin had commissioned a beautiful portrait of President Trump from the leading Russian artist, and actually gave it to me and asked me to take it home to President Trump.
So that artwork is reportedly now displayed in the White House, but the urgency and the hope of a truce deal back then now replaced by incremental signs of frustration from President Trump. No truce in sight, nor apparent intention either from Putin. The Kremlin rhetoric continues, calls for regime change in Ukraine, disarmament, while increasing its bombardment on Ukrainian cities, now to an unprecedented scale. A week ago, the Pentagon said it was pausing the transport of some defensive weapons to Kyiv to reassess its own supplies. This week, President Trump reversing that decision, given events on the ground, he said.
Putin is not treating human beings right. He's killing too many people. So we're sending some defensive weapons to Ukraine, and I've approved that.
So who ordered the pause last week?
I don't know. Why don't you tell me?
And that includes, we're told today, the resumption of Patriot defence weapons. President Zelensky, according to Reuters in the past 10 minutes, saying that resumption has restarted. Joachim, let's begin with your thought. A strategic reversal of policy this week. We heard about the Patriot defence weapons being sent to. And the reporter there from CNN left guessing on who it was that decided to withhold defensive weapons in the first place last week. What's your take?
So, I mean, rather than, we've seen this many times of pausing of intelligence sharing, of pausing of weapons shipments, and then continuing, and then questions about what is being delivered and what is not being delivered. What I think is most fundamentally important is, will we see an actual change in Trump's policy towards Ukraine? Because if we remember back to the start of May, this is what Europe really has been hoping for and playing for and placating Trump for, months on end already, and especially at the summit at The Hague. And it may be that now we're getting really what we're paying off, because what Europe has been afraid of is not really that, the US will stop any or all deliveries of aid to Ukraine. What we've really been afraid of, even though, public leaders won't say this straight to camera, is that Trump will somehow start working in favor of the Russians. If his special envoys are saying things like, oh, they speak Russian anyway in the east of Ukraine, let's, this part may belong to Russia anyway. This is really damaging to the efforts of what Europe has been trying to do. So what we're really hoping for is that this, tough words will follow through with tough actions, maybe on Monday, maybe through this sanctions package that Senator Lindsey Graham, the Republican, has been proposing, that Europe is very fond of and has been talking about basically nonstop for the last few months. I mean, this would include 500% tariffs on countries still importing Russian energy, which could be far stronger than any of the sanctions we have in place now. And Europe is really trying to get in lockstep with the US, and has been trying to since the start of May. So the real question is, will we see this lockstep now?
Louise, Joachim saying, will we see this lockstep now? Just strikes me, going back to the man that we talked about buying the Swiss cheese and ham sandwich back in the 80s, who on Tucker Carlson also kind of got wrong, didn't he, the areas of Ukraine, kind of mixed them up, and you got a sense of naivety about it. What's your understanding of what's going on within the White House, to the best of your knowledge here? Because one way to look at it, that he hasn't walked away, and by investing and restarting the defensive weapons, there is a sense that he's likely to stick around. What do you think?
I think that Trump is extraordinarily mercurial, and he relies on that in order, he kind of leans into it, and when he is involved in foreign policy negotiations. So one minute you've got Steve Witkoff going into a meeting with Putin and relying on a Kremlin translator for that. And afterwards saying these, very positive things about Putin, he's been, generous in speaking to them, and that they're getting somewhere. And then now, Trump, if there's one thing we know, Trump loves to make a deal, and he hates being made to look like a fool. And I think this is where we're at now. He's flipped sort of from his innate reaction, I think, was always to think that Biden backed Ukraine. We do not like Biden. As a result of that, we're going to try something different. And then so what they were saying a few months ago, what the Republicans were saying a few months ago was like, well, hey, we've got to talk to the Russians. It's stupid not to. We want to end the war. Okay. Then they spoke to the Russians. Trump realized that Putin was saying a bunch of stuff which just, wasn't happening, and that he would go into negotiations in order to try and string him along and then launch these huge barrages on Ukraine that we've seen over the last few days, but also in recent months. And then I think Trump got frustrated. What's interesting is that from the Ukrainian politicians that I spoke to a few months ago, they were kind of banking on this. There was a lot of hope from the Ukrainians that Trump would go into the idea of trying to speak to Putin and then trying to make a deal, try and make this historic Nobel Peace Prize winning deal that he wants, and that he'd eventually get frustrated with Putin's games, flip around and start kind of backing the Ukrainians. And they're hoping that that's what happened. But the problem is with relying on Trump's mercurial sense of negotiations is that it can really easily flip back the other way.
But then if it flips back the other way, Agnes, I'm just minded of the fact that, and let me know your thought on this, is Putin impervious to Trump's charms and his threats?
Oh, yes. As a former KGB agent, he's impervious to anybody's charm. If Trump has charm, that's another question. No, what is interesting is that, Trump doesn't want to spend much money on giving weapons to Ukraine. On the other hand, he doesn't want Ukraine to collapse under his watch. You know, the optics are very important for him. That would be a disaster. So he needs really to sort of help Ukraine. I mean, remember Afghanistan, and actually Trump was extremely critical of Biden for having let, happen the collapse of Afghanistan, really, when they withdrew. So he cannot let Ukraine collapse. And also that idea that the Pentagon was, had to pause on the supply of weapons because it was coming from their stocks doesn't hold, because they are being manufactured. It doesn't come from American stocks, so they can continue supplying weapons. Now, I mean, he's the most powerful ally we all have. He's also the most unreliable, and you need to. So he changes his opinion all the time. And what is interesting is that you could argue that America first was a sort of ideology, whether you like it or not, with a set of values, convictions, and therefore you could foresee his actions. But no, America first is what Trump says. So even his own collaborators, partners, devotees, fans, ideologues don't know what it means, and like the rest of us.
There is more to the story that's kind of coming out. Catherine, I want to get your take on this. So this is what leaked this week. This is audio ended up in the hands of 3 authors behind a new book called Trump 2024, How Trump Retook the White House and the Democrats Lost America. We think it's going to appear. This is the leak. Well, I can. Maybe we're going to go to it. Let's give it 3 seconds. If not, I will paraphrase it. Okay, the gallery's telling me it's not there. Essentially, oh no, we have it. Let's go to it.
It's like Trump.
To Putin, I said, if you go in to Ukraine, we're going to bomb the out of Moscow. I'm telling you, I have no choice. The public wants the public. The public. So he goes like, I don't believe you. He said, no way, and I said, way.
He said, no way, I said, way. And so this is about, if you go in, I will bomb the heck out of Russia. Now, this seems to work to the benefit of Trump, and it gets to the what and the why, who would leak this, and how much further it takes the story.
Well, there are expert leakers, we think, within the White House administration. Remember all those things that came out about Elon Musk and his alleged ketamine habits and parenting problems just as he was getting fired. So perhaps this has been leaked out on purpose, one would imagine so. But it just shows, as we were saying, how mercurial Trump is. And I guess that's what they want to get across to the Kremlin, is that, look, we're not automatically on your side. Trump, as you know, joined in the bombing of Iranian nuclear sites. Nothing is off the table. And I just wanted to add in, from my recent trip to Ukraine, when I saw, we went to the northern city of Sumy, and there had been a pause in US military aid for around a week or so in the spring after Zelensky's being taken down in the Oval Office by Trump and Vance. And we spoke to members of the military there who told us how damaging that was in terms of the intelligence sharing and in terms of some of the long-range use of longer-range missiles, which they couldn't use. And it cost them a lot. There were other factors involved, such as weather factors, making it easy for the drones to find them. But they incurred big losses in the space of that week. So this pause in weapons, even though now it's resumed, the cost on the battlefield, and every night when you see these hundreds of drones going over and attacking Ukrainian cities, it's really tangible in Ukraine. And so, this might have been a miscommunication or not between Trump and Hegseth, his defense secretary. But the real world implications are huge. And Ukraine is basically struggling to contain the Russian threat right now. Things are very, very tough for them. This is not insignificant on the battlefield.
No, you make a very good point. Every week we're hearing a new record being set of the amount of drones sent overnight, and dummy drones becoming an increasing threat too. Louise, I wonder whether you think, just watching this play out in the White House, after all of these weeks, has the urgency gone on that pressure on Putin now?
I'm not sure. I think, as always, everyone around Trump is just running to try and catch up to the latest thing that he's said. I think it's very difficult to see the way that this is going to develop over the next few weeks. We don't know what he's going to say on Monday. He's trailed that there's going to be some kind of big announcement. But I think that for Trump, he really, really desperately wants to make a big, earth-shattering deal that ends this war. I think this is the thing that he wants. That urgency is undimmed. That will continue whether these particular talks go anywhere or not.
Well, on that issue of big announcements expected, let's move on to the latest on Israel and Gaza, because it was 7 a.m. Monday morning when the Wing of Zion, the Israeli Prime Minister's official aircraft, landed at Andrews Air Force Base just outside Washington, D.C. for the start of a 4-day visit to the U.S. Notably, in its rarity, Benjamin Netanyahu inviting the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, to travel with him, seen as a way of demonstrating two unified administrations in alignment. Netanyahu's third trip to the White House since January, when Trump took over. This visit began with a tribute to his biggest backer, a Nobel Peace Prize nomination.
I want to present to you, Mr. President, the letter I sent to the Nobel Prize Committee. It's nominating you for the Peace Prize, which is well-deserved, and you should get it.
Thank you very much. This I didn't know. Wow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming from you in particular, this is very meaningful. Thank you very much, Bibi.
Thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you. It's a great honor.
A nomination for contributions to peace in the Middle East, said the Israeli government, for brokering the Abraham Accords, for helping to normalise relations with Morocco, Sudan, the UAE, Bahrain in Trump's first term, as well as extraordinary strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities and bringing about a subsequent ceasefire, so far still holding between Tehran and Tel Aviv. As to the war and the continual suffering in Gaza, well, last week President Trump believed we were a week away from a truce. After the Nobel nomination and during the banquet in the Blue Room of the White House, journalists were asking what's happened to the ceasefire.
In the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, what's currently the holdup?
I don't think there is a holdup. I don't think there's a holdup. I think things are going along very well. They just, left each other, and it was not a pleasant period of a few days. It was a little longer than a few days, but this was not a pleasant period of time.
Well, indirect talks in Doha have been going on at the same time as this tour. Our correspondent in Jerusalem, Noga Tarnopolsky, says it was comparatively low-level Israeli delegation. Israeli officials briefing reporters that a permanent ceasefire is unlikely, blaming Hamas for proposing changes, including wanting guarantees on removing Israeli troops at the end of the war and bringing back UN aid distribution instead of the controversial Israeli-US-run Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Well, daily updates of more deaths in Gaza, more than 500 this week from IDF strikes, including on Thursday as people queued for nutritional supplements at a clinic in central Gaza. 15 Palestinians killed, more than half children, as well as a pregnant woman, according to hospital staff. Catherine, you were following developments closely. You're back and forth to the Middle East, not to Gaza. What's your assessment this week?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Trump would have tried to put maximum pressure on Netanyahu. We saw him do it over Iran. We saw him basically call back Israeli warplanes as they were going to try, and it seemed that the ceasefire that Trump and his team had negotiated wouldn't hold. I was in southern Israel myself when we heard Israeli jets flying out again after an Iranian strike. And then 5 minutes later, we heard them coming back. And we didn't know what was going on at the time, but later, it basically turned out that it seemed Trump had got on the phone and it pretty angrily ordered Netanyahu to turn those jets around. We know he can put pressure on Netanyahu. Clearly, this is not turning out. This is not turned into a ceasefire yet. There are stumbling blocks. There are big issues there. That's what Qatari officials are saying, that there are things that are going to take some time. Trump would absolutely love to make a big deal. He would absolutely love to win the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, for his ego, this would be the ultimate prize. It's clearly very extremely complex issues there. Maybe there's some trade-off with Iran, the Iran deal that he made Israel sign up to, and now the Gaza deal.
That he has leverage.
Yeah. So he has leverage. It hasn't resulted in anything yet, and we're not sure why, basically.
Which begs the question, Louise, there's bound to be in 4 days, and there's a lot of Israeli analysts saying what else was on the agenda, what else did Benjamin Netanyahu want from President Trump, and the conveniency of President Trump saying, I'm just finding out right now about this nomination, to which we later found out, didn't we, with Keir Starmer when he had that official state visit invite and pulled that letter out of his pocket. We've later heard from spads of Keir Starmer saying that that was orchestrated in advance. Trump had said to him, let's do this on camera. So there are big questions over that too, aren't there?
Well, yeah, I mean, this question about the Nobel Prize nomination, there were some African leaders in the White House earlier this week as well who also said that they wanted him to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Everyone seems to be kind of, perhaps they don't think that Trump is aware that that's not how the Nobel Peace Prize works, that it's not like they ask all the leaders of the world who they think should win it, and then they all put in their votes, and then the person who wins the most votes wins the Nobel Peace Prize. Like, that's not how that works. It's a couple of, I think, 5 academics in Norway who kind of sit down and decide who's going to win it. But regardless of that, what's clearly happening is that they think that world leaders know that Trump responds incredibly well to flattery, and that he wants to make these big deals, and that he wants to have like a big kind of diplomatic achievement to his name. But this time he didn't get one. Netanyahu was in Washington, and he's gone home without a truce. You know, they were trying to, there's several sticking points that they're really halting over at the moment, and they're really fundamental. You know, it's like the length of the truce. How long is it going to be? What's the extent of the Israeli withdrawal? Will Israeli troops remain in Gaza? And also, how will the distribution of aid work? You know, now we've seen people being murdered, you know, being massacred, being killed as they wait for aid by people who are supposed to be kind of protecting them. That hasn't happened.
To which, Agnes, let me ask you what you think kind of Keir Starmer's position is here in the UK, because I want to mention this to you. This week, the Labour peer, Baroness Helena Kennedy, has made the headline. She's a leading British barrister, renowned for her work in human rights. She had said this, that she's of the opinion Israel is, quote, committing genocide, that she's calling on the government to be much more vocal in its condemnation of what's happening. Israel vehemently denies it. But I just wonder about the British government here and the line that Keir Starmer is walking.
Well, I mean, it's almost completely irrelevant for the Middle East what Keir Starmer is doing, or what indeed Macron is saying about perhaps recognizing the state of Palestine. Europe is nowhere on that subject. And
not in terms of pressure. If there was a more vocal Europe, which is Baroness Kennedy's point, then actually that pressure builds.
Yes, but Britain is not Europe, is it? In terms,
well, discuss.
I mean, it's not EU. It's not EU. Okay. No, but I mean, Keir Starmer has domestic, problems with part of the Labour Party, and so you've always had that tendency within the margin of, the leftist, Corbynist, pro-Palestine. So this is bound to happen, if you'd like, but I don't think Trump or Netanyahu are even talking about it. Now, what is interesting is that Netanyahu owes Trump quite a lot after Iran. He needs Trump on side in case Iran actually does continue, it tries to recover the enriched uranium and continue doing what they were doing. So it might just be a question of months. And Netanyahu really needs Trump to actually act again, should there be any need for that. So I'm quite hopeful that at least a 60-day truce might happen with the liberation of the remaining hostages. It doesn't mean that the truce will lead, obviously, to the end of the war. Now, Hamas is also they are considering perhaps, that their surviving leaders go to in exile. They've lost the backing of Iran. I mean, Iran has other things to do. So this could happen. That would really make the day of Trump. Trump would be very happy about that. At least he would have something to announce. That's possible. Also, there's the question of the next elections in Israel that needs to take place before October 2026. After Iran, perhaps Netanyahu, thinks that he could call early elections and also you've got, a lot of leaks coming from the army in Israel and the general saying there's nothing left to do in Gaza. So there's no need for us to remain. We're not, bombing buildings that have already been destroyed and trying to avoid being killed by ambush because, recently there were 5 Israeli soldiers that were killed. So I think there's, I'm quite hopeful that at least a truce will be reached.
This leads us on to Joachim. I want to get your take here, because on the ground, in terms of what's to do, reported in Israel this week, an Israeli plan to build what they're calling a humanitarian city in Gaza, in the rubble of Rafah in the south. Defence Minister Israel Katz talking about it. The 60-day ceasefire is agreed, ordering the army to make plans to transfer all Palestinians in Gaza to this new camp in Rafah, to which we're hearing the IDF, many soldiers, according to Israeli media, very uncomfortable with that. What's your take on that developing this week?
Well, I mean, we've seen this step by step, right, of Israel bombing a region and invading with their army in terms of Gaza and then relocating people, and all of this has not really mediated the humanitarian catastrophe that's taking place. So, I mean, in terms of, trying to help these people, I don't think you would expect anything positive from this, really. But I would like to speak to the point of, yes, Europe is quite irrelevant on this, but on what are we doing here in Europe, here in Brussels, and what we're trying to do. So this week you also had the EU Commission, the foreign rep Kaja Kallas, touting a deal with the Israeli government to provide more aid into Gaza. And saying that this was a win of the diplomatic efforts. Over the last weeks, we've had EU talking about suspending maybe this base agreement that basically sets the terms for trading and having our relations between the EU and Israel. So this threat, at least Kaja Kallas, the high rep of the foreign policy chief of the EU, is saying that this is a win, but at least we're engaging and talking with Israel, getting something out of it. So, it's not like nothing is happening, but EU foreign policy is like herding cats. It's pretty much impossible for anybody. So it's very hard to agree on tougher measures to make Israel actually do something about what's happening, but a little bit maybe is being tried and done.
Yes, to your point, to which Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron and Friedrich Merz have been operating as the E3 with a voice, and particularly Germany, of course, a big donor, a big provider of military aid for Israel. So there are implications there. I also want to talk about this week a controversy brewing over one of the world's big three consultancy firms. This is the Boston consultancy group, BCG, under fire for its involvement in controversial post-war Gaza plan, after being commissioned by an Israeli businessman to provide a financial model for Trump Riviera. Remember that, based on the AI post on Trump's social media, on Truth Social earlier this year, called Trump Gaza, and how to make it a reality.
You free, bringing the light for all to see. No more tunnels, no more fear. Trump Gaza is finally here. Trump Gaza shining bright, a golden future, a brand new light. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza #1. Trump Gaza shining bright, a golden future, a brand new light. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza #1.
So it appeared that, according to the Financial Times this week, the BCG group considered a scenario to try to enact this. An estimated 500,000 Gazans would leave the enclave with relocation packages, quote, worth $9,000 per person. Greg Carlson of The Economist saying BCG is asking and has been asked to model the cost of relocating Palestinians from Gaza. In other words, to come up with a price tag for ethnic cleansing. In an email to the staff, the CEO of the company, Christoph Schweitzer, apologised, saying, quote, we fell below our standards. 2 staff have been fired for unauthorised work. Catherine, that is worth mentioning this week. This is a significant development.
Yeah, absolutely. And every week, every day seems to bring these plans and statements and videos and revelations about what certain parts of Israeli society and affiliated companies or think tanks are looking at for after the war in Gaza. And we had the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, saying this week, talking about this humanitarian city in Rafah, and saying that it could be for 600,000 Palestinians who would be screened, allowed to enter, but not allowed to leave. And the only way they could leave is by taking the expatriation route, emigration route, by leaving. So this kind of statement is something that will be studied later on, is already being studied legally in terms of, the forced displacement of people. And if you're kind of herding people with this very violent conflict going on, not giving them enough food, and with the deadly bombings going on, into a place they can't leave. Surely that is basically a prison camp, and then forced displacement. So just the kind of normalization of these things that we're seeing, that video that you played there from a few months ago, which just, was created by some Israeli AI firm, but reposted by Trump himself. It's just so unimaginable. Every day almost seems to bring new revelations like this.
And it's worth saying BCG, they're a huge consultancy firm, one of the big three. They deal with Apple, Microsoft, Pfizer, in France as well, BNP Paribas, L'Oréal. Let's move to developments in the UK this week, to RAF Norfolk, West London, 10 o'clock Tuesday morning. President Macron and Brigitte arrived at the start of a 3-day UK state visit, the first European leader since Brexit to receive a royal red carpet rollout, and a notable moment for eagle-eyed historians too. It was the Grenadier Guards who provided the guard of honour for the French leader, the regiment famous for its pivotal role of defeating Napoleon at Waterloo. And we also saw the Guards accompanied by a military band playing L'Entente Cordiale, underscoring a 1904 agreement of the same name which set out to turn centuries of rivalry and hostilities into neighbourly cooperation. Apt given the frosty relations in the post-Brexit years. It was only 3 years ago. We just heard it from Agnes referring to Liz Truss, that she referred to him as former Prime Minister. Asked whether Macron was friend or foe, she replied, "The jury is out." And this was set out as a presidential trip to heal the wounds and seal a rapprochement mutually beneficial for both countries. And by Thursday, several agreements made included the Northwood Declaration, a coordination of nuclear deterrence for both countries, also the formalisation of a joint leadership of the Defence Alliance, known as the Coalition of the Willing, a headquarters in Paris, and also chuck in what you can see, the loan of the Bayeux Tapestry, which will be heading to the UK next year for the first time in 900 years, while the French Museum in Normandy undergoes renovations. Let's begin, Agnes, with your take. You talked about a success. Talk us through some of the smaller, finer detail that you picked up.
So, well, you mentioned it. I think Emmanuel Macron really wanted to help Keir Starmer about those small boats, as they are called in the UK. So there's this deal, or this idea, this concept of one in, one out. So Britain would accept a migrant who has family links, for instance, or very good reason to be in the UK, and would send back migrants who don't. We learned that in the next few weeks, it will only be 50 people per day, I think.
Per week.
Or per week.
Yeah.
So this is really a small step. Also, it has to be said, it needs to be approved by the EU and other EU states, because if this happens, then France could actually return the migrants arrived in France to their first port of call. And this is likely to be Italy or Spain or other countries, and they need to have a say. And already Giorgia Meloni and Pedro Sanchez said, hang on a minute, we need to have a look at that deal. So I think it was, Keir Starmer needed to announce something that hadn't been done or hadn't been envisaged. So on paper it looks, okay. Solution. They want to create a deterrent, which I understand. That is to say, for all the passeurs and the people making fortune out of those poor people, bringing them to their, really at their perils, grave perils, to Britain, to say, look, actually, there's no need for you to come because you'll be returned back to France or to your country. So that is one thing. Then there was the nuclear. I mean, all the talks about now we are the two nuclear power in the EU. We also are members of the Security Council, and we need to take decisions together. How this could happen when actually, if you look at the UK, their nuclear power is really embedded with American approval. Yes. So how could this happen? That, I don't know. At least in theory, it's nice for two nations to say, well, if there's an extreme danger to Europe, we'll make a decision together. Fine. Again, on paper, it looks good.
Briefly, Catherine, the 20 seconds we've got, if we look at how it started, how's it going? What's your impression of this week?
In terms of the British-French relationship, I mean, I think Keir Starmer did get a political win out of that announcement, and it was met with quite a bit of dismay in northern France around Calais, both by the charities that help the migrants, the refugees, saying that people have made up their mind long before they get to the northern French coast. It's not going to be much of a deterrent, and by the right-wing mayor of Calais, who says it's just going to lead to more of a bottleneck and misery for people in the area. So it might be seen as a political win for Keir Starmer, but it might turn out to be a political headache here on this side of the channel.
One in, one out sounds simple, but it's clearly a very vexed issue, as you described. Thank you to all of you this week, all of my panel. From Washington, Louise Callahan, senior US correspondent for the Sunday Times. Thank you, Louise. Also in Brussels, we have Joachim as well, Kalenti from the Estonian Public Broadcaster. Thank you, Joachim. In Paris with me, Catherine Norris-Trent, senior international correspondent for France 24. Thank you also, the acclaimed author and writer Agnes Barrier. Thank you to you. Thank you for watching in a week where an example of the union between Britain and France was also seen at the auction house. I'm talking about Jane Birkin and Hermes, the original prototype of the Birkin bag, complete with sticker marks, sold here in Paris on Thursday to 8.6 million euros. We will leave you with Jane Birkin saying what she liked about living as an English woman in France in the 70s. We'll see you in 7 days for The World Next Week.
I like being in France because I'm a stranger. I needn't have to understand everything. It's like being on the train and opening up the windows. You could sort of shriek about naked and then pull the shutter down and you're gone. No one can catch you. And that's it's rather like, I mean, you know, I've come here and you don't stop. I never arrive at the destination, which is what I like best.